Hey friends, Dean here with some exciting news to share. You can now buy us a coffee. That's right. You can help support independent content creators like us by becoming a member of the 3324 Green Room at buymeacoffee.com/3324. Our episodes will always be free and that will not change, but your support at buymeacoffee.com/3324 will help us continue to bring you the best in music and movie podcasting, in our humble opinion. As a Green Room supporter, you'll not only have our undying gratitude, but you'll also be able to vote on which episodes we record and receive other perks for as low as $3 per month. That's the price of a cup of coffee. There's absolutely no obligation, and nothing about the show will change. It's not going behind a paywall. Go to buymeacoffee.com/3324 for all the details. The link will be in the show notes of every episode as well. We'll see you in the Green Room. Progressive rock goes for the pop charts with a who's who of Prog's finest teaming up to bring us the self-titled debut album from Asia. Stay right there.
Get ready for the 3324 podcast, where lifelong friends Dean Legiro and Eric Kuber share their love of all things music and movies. Dean has directed short films and is a music trivia buff. And Eric, trained in audio engineering, brings his extensive knowledge of music and film to the conversation as they discuss, debate, and celebrate their favorite albums, films, and much more.
Welcome, friends, to the 3324 podcast. So happy that you can join us. If it's your first time, welcome aboard. We always welcome new friends. We love to make new friends, Eric, right? We love to expand our circle.
We do.
There.
And we have.
Yeah, we have. And
big
every
time.
new, big time.
Big time, yeah.
And every new listener, we value you, and we hope you're going to stay with us and hang out. And if you came for this episode, go check out our back catalog. There's a lot of other stuff like this, or if this is not your thing and you're checking it out, there's a whole bunch of other stuff there too as well. So either way, we got you covered with the best in music and movie podcasting. Now that's from our point of view. That's the view from the couch, right, Eric?
Indeed.
And it's the view from the green IKEA chair. But we'll take the Pepsi challenge. We'll take the Pepsi challenge with any of the other podcasts that talk about this stuff. We'll swing for the fences with them.
Why not?
One of the reasons why we do swing for the fences is our guest with us is Mr. Christopher Clark.
Good evening, gentlemen.
How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Thank you.
Great
Good to be
have
back as
you
always.
here. Yeah, great to have you here. This album is a Prog. What's a pop album by Prog artists? And Chris was like, "Yeah, I'm in."
Now I'm a big Prog guy, so Asia is one of those records. Like, when I was first getting into Prog in high school, I had a teacher, a choir teacher, who was huge into Prog, and then my old man also always liked Yes. So as I was getting into Prog, I was learning about all the different configurations of bands, and Asia was always one of those ones where it was kind of interesting insofar as that, like, in reading up on them, like, it's amazing how little Prog fans actually like them, which I find surprising because I think this record's awesome, and I think there's a lot more Prog to it than Prog fans are willing to acknowledge. And I found it kind of frustrating to go read some of the message boards this week, which is
I think it was a curious time for pop music and for Prog music, and then kind of creating this group, which we'll get into. We of course need to do the stats and need to let everybody know that I am outnumbered on this episode. It's not that I don't like Prog music, but Eric is much more of a purveyor and much more of a aficionado, and as is Chris. So I have the Three Lies and a Truth prepared, the Prog edition, the Asia edition, and we'll see if how they do, if they totally torch me, which I've taken some lumps recently, but we're going to keep doing it. And then you can play at home too and let us know on social media how you do on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube. But first, let's get to the stats. This album, self-titled, the group is Asia and the album is Asia, released March 1982, produced by Mike Stone. Very interesting choice there. There were 3 singles released. Heat of the Moment hit number 4. Only Time Will... I'm sorry, there was 4, but one there was 4 singles. 3 of them hit the charts. 1 hit the mainstream like a rock chart. So Heat of the Moment hit number 4. Only Time Will Tell hit number 17. Soul Survivor hit number 10, I think, on the mainstream rock chart. That's what it was. There were 3 singles, but Soul Survivor charted on the mainstream rock chart. The other 2 hit the regular. All songs are co-written by John Wetton. That's the without getting too deep into the songwriting credits, John Wetton pretty much wrote or co-wrote everything, and then you have a mix of other members of Asia in there helping him to write. It did hit number 1 on Billboard, so this was a number 1 album from I think they were nominated for like a Best New Artist Grammy, but these guys were already pretty long in the tooth, so it's kind of interesting that these guys are getting a Best New Artist. Anyway, and then it went 4 times platinum, so that's in excess of 4 million copies out the door. Yes. No. Yes on the
no. Yes. No.
No. Yes. No. I'm not sure which one.
Who's on first?
Yeah. Who?
Exactly.
Roger Daltrey. The members of Asia are John Wetton on bass, Steve Howe on guitars, Jeff Downes on keyboards, and Carl Palmer on drums. Eric, do you want to break down the pedigree of each one of these members and where they from whence they sprang? What prog group did these gentlemen flower from individually?
Right. Well, Steve Howe was with Yes, guitarist for Yes, extraordinaire. Jeff Downes was with the Buggles with Trevor Horn, but did join Yes on the Drama LP, which came out in 1980, which was pretty much the album that kind of Yes at that point had disintegrated.
And that was with Trevor Horn also.
He was Trevor Horn was the lead vocalist taking over for John Anderson. Yeah. Okay. Carl Palmer, of course, from Emerson, Lake and Palmer. And then John Wetton, who played in a lot of bands, a lot of different bands. He was with King Crimson. He formed his own band with Bill Bruford of Yes, called UK. He was a session bass player. He played with Roxy Music, of all bands. So, I mean, he's
mainly known for King Crimson, safe to say?
King Crimson, yeah. Robert Fripp. Okay. The Red Album, probably one of their best. Yep. Just a trio of him and Fripp, Wetton, and Bruford. That's an amazing record.
Really is.
But there you have it. I mean, he got his feet wet. I mean, he did a little bit of, I think, enough work where it, justifiably, I think the songwriting is he's pretty much the principal player here. So,
it seems like it. It seems like all the stuff I read in interviews where he's actually talking about inspirations for particular songs, and he was very precise about it and saying, I felt this way, or I was doing this, or going through that, and blah, blah, blah. So
and he's got an amazing voice. I mean, he had he had really...
a little bit of a rasp, but a strong voice too.
Strong baritone voice, much like Greg Lake.
I was going to say he has this very similar timbre to Greg Lake.
Yeah, in the later years, especially, Greg Lake would develop that deeper tone to his voice. But yeah, I that to me was one of the best things about this record was the singing on it.
Yeah.
So
all right,
there you have it. There's the lineup.
That's the lineup. Now this was. I guess not really an organic meeting, right? No. Like if I'll just use this as a comparison. We'll use the Traveling Wilburys as a comparison of we're talking about supergroups, right?
Yes, yeah.
The Wilburys came together rather organically. Someone needed a studio. A bunch of people were hanging around. They showed up. They hung out. They played. Hey, this is fun. Let's continue to do this, right? That was kind of like what happened there. This seemed like more of an assemblage of putting these people together. Is that correct?
Yeah, there was a gentleman that he was I believe a record or producer or somebody in the bit. I forget his name. And he approached. Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
It's not John Kolodner, is it?
Yes, that is. Yeah. That's the.
There it is.
There it is. See, that's why we have these people on. So, so in case we forget things, Chris has.
So, Chris, who's John Kolodner?
John Kolodner's an A&R guy. He's more known for like discovering a lot of the '80s hair metal bands. Like he's kind of credited with resurrecting Aerosmith.
Yeah.
He's the one that turned Whitesnake into what Whitesnake became in the late 80s. I know he signed Iron Maiden in the early 2000s when they got Bruce Dickinson back. So he's more associated with the hard rock. I think he actually signed Foreigner in the 70s. Like he's that kind of guy. He's given a credit for a lot of the major bands that like hard rock bands.
He's a promoter and kind of
he's basically A&R. He will say, this is what I think is good, this is what I think is bad, and that kind of thing. Promotes the bands, and he was big with Geffen Records, I think, in the 80s.
Makes a lot of sense given what the album ultimately became, I think, especially in the production, because he approached John Wetton in a meeting, and Wetton had formed a group with Rick Wakeman of Yes. At this point, Yes were pretty much done, and Trevor Rabin, or I don't know how it's either Rabin or Rabin.
Rabin, I believe.
I have always pronounced it Rabin, but I've heard people,
everybody else is wrong.
So they were kind of tooling around. They were doing some stuff, and it'd be interesting to hear some of those sessions to see what that sounded like. But and then he was like playing bass for Roxy Music, and this guy, he was like, "Why are you standing behind Brian Ferry? You should be in the front. You should be a front man. You got a great voice. You're a great bass player, great musician. You've been around. You should be leading your own band." And I had never really heard, I had never known this. I had never known this story until researching it, because it's been a long time since I actually listened to the album as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it wasn't formed, like it wasn't within the group. I don't, it wasn't a natural progression. Like the group would think, oh, we need to do something slightly more pop, and because changing with the times, like we always talk about. But yeah, this was kind of organized that way.
Kind of Frankenstein. They kind of took pieces from dead prog groups, right? And kind of assembled them. Now, Chris, where do you come in on this as well?
Like I said, for me, it's really my love of Yes and ELP, and I grew up, especially in high school, I really loved those bands a lot. And the 70s prog scene, and that kind of led me to check this record out. And I listened to it, and I always liked it. And I hadn't, like Eric, I hadn't listened to it in a really long time, and I really didn't know the whole story behind the band, other than the fact that Steve Howe and Jeff Downes, who played on Drama, which honestly to me is like a lost great album. I think it's one of Yes's
very underrated
record. I mean, they played the Garden for 5 nights on that tour. So like, I think this record is great just for the fact that you have Howe and Downes in it. And and I always liked Greg Lake, and to me, when I first heard Asia, I actually thought it was Greg Lake singing. So like, and I got confused because I know Greg Lake
eventually,
right? He played with them in Japan on MTV. Right, so
Asia in Asia.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm also of the mind, like as a prog fan, I think I said this. I don't know if I said this before we were on or after. It just always blows me away of how down on it prog rock fans are. Like, I was reading on one of those prog rock message boards yesterday, and I actually wrote in when I Googled it. I said, do prog fans consider Asia prog? And then there was this whole list of like, well, they should just call this record Alimony. They were just doing this because they wanted to put another Rolls Royce in their driveway. And like, they were really angry. And the biggest thing that I likened it to, and that I came back to, and I keep thinking about, is it's kind of the same vibe. Like, I remember being, a little metalhead kid when the Black Album by Metallica came out, and all of my friends just like, either you like the Black Album or you shout on it because it wasn't Master of Puppets with all the long and drawn out tunes. And to my mind, I don't know if that's just because this was like an A&R created thing, or is it because, how much more can we do with the, 17-minute, close to the edge type songs. And we just want to take those elements and make them more concise and work with them in a more refined structure. And to me, I'd like to think, as far as integrity, Steve Howe is in the latter and not the former. And so that's kind of where I landed. I think it's a great record. They took what really is great about prog and put them into some really great rock and roll songs. That's how I
and therein lies the rub. And Eric and I talked about this when we talked about Rush.
Yeah.
And when we talked about Peter Gabriel. And there was probably other bands that we mentioned too, that especially when we talked about Rush Moving Pictures, is that there was a conscious move to do what they for Rush to do what they do, just in a shorter time span.
Mhm.
right? Like kind of, we still want to be rushed. We just want to get it more tighter and concise, so it's easier for to reach more people. I mean, that in the end, that's what it is. So I can understand where the Prog cognoscenti or whatever you want to call them, the hoity-toity, the hoi polloi of Prague could be mad at this and be like, yeah, this seems like because it is kind of manufactured. These people were kind of brought together from these different things to create this quote unquote Prague supergroup, but then to make pop music.
Mhm.
Essentially, right? So it almost belies what they were. It's almost like getting a bunch of the best classical artists you have around and make a country album.
Yeah.
Right. Like they'd be
Yeah.
like, well, what the hell's going, like, what, you're not giving us what we're expecting from these people. But in a way they did. In a way, this is the same thing that Peter Gabriel was trying to do with So is make the music more accessible, but still firmly Peter Gabriel.
Like,
Right?
I don't think they strayed too much from, like, I went through and I listened to this record and like,
Yeah.
I had it on before I came on tonight. And if I go through each one of these cuts, I can point to something that either was influenced by one of their previous bands,
Yeah.
or something that I've heard in a band later on that was influenced by this record. So while you could say, well, it's like putting a classical band to create country, to me, it sounds like Prog, just not with all of those extended passages that you would hear on like
Exactly.
Foxtrot or Close to the Edge. Like, I don't think it's all. And again, Prog fans might come from my head, but like, to me, it's just a more concise thing. Just like the same way Metallica Black Album is a metal record, and so is Master of Puppets. To me, this is a Prog record, just in a pop format. Like, that's how I see it.
Yeah. And I guess, Eric, the question would be, how many Prog records go to number one? Not many.
No.
Like,
this is a
right?
rarity. This is
So
an
it's kind of
absolute
like,
rarity. And
yeah.
and
So
it
it's
worked.
kind of like
The
this
formula
is them.
worked. So whatever it was that they were, whoever made the decision to decidedly do, I guess it's now known as AOR, or sort of take a more journey approach. Hence Mike Stone's involvement in the production. This was probably the best time. I had the advantage of listening, because Chris, I didn't have the advantage of having a dad that was into all this stuff. So I was at that age, I was just getting into this stuff. I was just getting into Prog, and listening to something like this, which was absolutely brand new, come out. And I had only, the only Prog bands that I really knew at that point were Rush and Yes. And I was getting into Genesis at the same time. It took me going back, of course, to going further back. And, but you had to, for me, these were the starting point albums. So it was cool for me to have, all of these guys together. But I'm starting to think that perhaps maybe the idea of Asia might have been a little bit greater than the actual product. I do like the album a lot. I think it's a great. I'm kind of speaking from a more nostalgic point of view. I think I guess at this point,
sure,
because there's just so many other great albums that I love more. I know these guys are absolutely capable of doing. And now that I know the story behind it, it kind of confirms my suspicions, so a little bit, especially, and like I said, we'll get to it, of course, but of course the production is probably my biggest thing about this record. That is just, it's too accessible in that sense, but yet the music doesn't really lend itself to that wide range. Like Journey, at least they had some soul to the music. Like, Steve Perry's voice just transcended like something. Some of this stuff is a little stuffy to me. It's rock. It's decidedly more rock.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really go in a way like Styx went, or Journey. Even those bands, they had their little noodling moments. Here, the restraint is remarkable on this record. And I think and perhaps that's part of the talent. A lot of people in our circle, our friend Rob Prisman, I remember him being very critical of this record. I remember specifically talking to him and our mutual.
Maybe that's why he didn't respond to the email asking.
And our mutual friend Adam Barish, they were like, "Oh, this album is not, it's a wasted effort." I'm like, really? It's just, I liked it. It's like I really liked this album. It's like, oh, like I was just trying to find out why, but they were all,
Yeah,
no,
I
it
don't.
doesn't
I don't think.
compare. You know, that kind
Yeah,
of
I
thing.
don't think
I mean,
Asia
it's
was going for the Prague audience, right? They were going for guys like me, like that were into rock and
That's
more of
right. Yeah.
a pop leaning,
Mhm.
right, where they could deliver this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And still slide that stuff in, because this is what I noticed. And when I listened to this album, I listened to it a bunch of times, and I don't know if I figured out what I don't know if I decoded it, but you guys can tell me. The first three songs are like Heat of the Moment, Only Time Will Tell, and Soul Survivor. Those are the three most popular songs,
Mhm.
popular songs,
Mhm.
popular, right? Because each one progressively gets a little bit more leaning towards the progressive elements. By the time
Yeah.
you get to One Step Closer, Time Again, Wildest Dreams, you're into really proggy style,
Yeah.
lyrical content about a general and the war and going, like it starts to it starts off really poppy and then starts to lean into the prog, and then by the time you get to Here Comes the Feeling, you're kind of back at the pop leanings, right?
Yeah.
Is that a fair like that's kind of, after listening to that, that's what I picked up. Chris, what do you have?
I mean, I definitely think I would agree with you, because what I noticed is that I was kind of marking down the standouts to me as I was listening to the record this afternoon, and I noticed that as it got a little bit, the ones that stood out to me and that I liked the most are probably the most proggy, and then like in true, it's like Key to the Moment and Soul Survivor definitely have that more. Those would be the obvious singles, and then to me, like you're saying, coming back around with Here Comes the Feeling, I actually wrote down on my little note for myself, it almost has like a reprise vibe, like it's kind of
Kind of,
almost like bringing it together at the end, like you'd almost expect that to be like the encore
yeah,
or
kind
the
of
last two.
wrapping up the album.
Right, exactly, it had that sense to it, and almost, I don't know if it completely aped other songs, but it had sounds of some of the other songs in the record as far
Sure.
as like tone and temperament, as far
Yeah.
especially earlier on in the record. So
Yeah, absolutely. Eric, is that assessment kind of
No, it's you're spot
there?
on.
I think that it gets a little more daring in the middle of the album. You get a little more instrumental-y
You're
stuff.
spot on. Yeah, you're spot
You know,
on with that. The middle, the three, One Step Closer, Time Again, Wildest Dreams for me. Time Again has hints of Carnival 9. Emerson, Lake and Palmer, just in the way the phrasing and the way he sings it, and the melody there is very reminiscent of Carnival 9 Part 1.
yep.
That fast point before the one that everybody knows. There's it's in three parts, but it kind of reminds me of that, sans Keith Emerson, of course. Instead, you have Steve Howe with more guitar, and that decidedly to me is surprisingly there's a nice balance between keyboard and guitar on this record. And that could have been, that could have went a totally other way, given the time frame and given everything was decidedly more synth, and Jeff Downes is known. I mean, he was with the Buggles.
yeah,
I mean, you can't get any more new wave and synth than that. But and yet there are those little flourishes there, that specific sound that he has with the vocoder and the that kind of stuff. I love that sound that he had, but it's nice that to have that little band. And Steve Howe isn't your typical rock guitar player either.
No.
So on songs like these, as you pointed out, Dean, you definitely get those, you know, those brush strokes there of
yeah.
Prog.
I think everybody's well represented. I think everybody's evenly represented, and that's probably a function of, you've got four big name. I think Jeff Downes, fair to say that Jeff Downes was probably the least known.
Mm-hmm.
Coming out of reading the lineup, it's like, oh, Carl Palmer, he was in Emerson, Lake and Palmer. It's like, oh, he's got name recognition, and Steve Howe. But I think they're all well represented, and I think what you don't like about the production, Eric, I think is what kind of helps this album and made it more accessible is kind of glossing it up a little bit. It's a tight sounding album for like you said, for all the stuff that's going on in there, especially at the end of Soul Survivor, where Cole Palmer's just double bassing it throughout the whole end of the album. There's all these little nuances and flourishes to pick up on. And in lesser hands, it would sound muddy, right? And that's where stuff gets, and that's when stuff becomes a drag. So if you're going to have prog leanings, I think that the fact that this has a really nice polish on it makes it easy to digest, makes it easy to pick out the guitar, the keyboard, like it really and even the bass is it like there's a nice mix of these instruments well represented, and it doesn't get murky, which makes it easy to kind of go through these albums for someone that's maybe not so much into prog.
That's fair. That's a very fair point. Yeah. It's just that polish, it's just that sheen that I tend to like. I like a more warm sound, when you think of like some of the albums that had, preceded this, it's like, but of course that was the 70s too.
Yeah.
So
and then they would lean into it with their following with Don't Cry. I mean, it had a different,
that was oh my God, that's even worse. Yeah.
I've never actually listened past this record as far. I'll be honest, like this is the only Age album I've ever listened to, but I heard Alpha took all of anything that was cool and proggy on this record was taken out on Alpha, and it's just a straight up pop record.
I think pretty much every song pretty much sounded the same. It's fair to say.
I didn't even listen to it either. I remember when Don't Cry came out, I'm like, this is a really cool. It's a really cool. It was even more poppy. And, they were really leaning that way, but I didn't buy it, and I didn't give the rest of the album a listen.
Yeah, it was. I mean, our mutual friend John was into this record. Our friend Dwight.
Yeah, a lot of people
loved this record. It was on the rotation all the time. It was it had its place. It definitely did. It was and then the second album came out, and that was a disappointment. Yeah. And then seeing them live was even worse. It's one of the worst concerts I ever been to.
Yeah, you actually seen them live?
Unfortunately, yes.
Not often you hear that when you say something after a concert.
Well,
it was Greg Lake, right? Because Wetton had already.
No, it was Wetton.
It was John Wetton.
Greg Lake only played in Japan. He played the MTV concert in Japan, and then John Wetton came back.
This was the Alpha. When Alpha came out, that's when we saw them. And it was pretty much, I guess maybe it's because they just didn't have enough material. They had just these two records to go off of, and then they would go off and do their little solos. Jeff Downes did this, of course, solo, which was, stuff that he had done with Yes, note for note. Carl Palmer. If you listen to the triple live record, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. The drum solo on that he does on that, it's the exact same drum solo. I'm like, are you kidding me? It's almost like they were playing this. You might as well have just played the record.
Yeah,
I wonder if they did.
Just recycling their old stuff.
Yeah, we saw them at the Meadowland. The acoustics there were not that great. Wetton, and this actually confirms my opinion. Because I had heard that Wetton was a heavy drinker at this point.
He was,
and he made a lot of the band, like the band, like would get on him about making a lot of mistakes. And as I recall, he would forget lines. He was repeating lines. It was pretty.
That's sloppy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so it wasn't a really great experience, and that's probably why when I stopped listening to Asia, even though they're still flourishing, they're still going.
Yeah, they're still out there.
And Jeff Downes is the key man.
He's the only guy left.
Yeah, he's keeping it alive. Yeah. You can't have a prog album without a cover by Roger Dean.
Yeah, that's amazing.
For those watching on YouTube, this is a prototypical prog album cover. And Roger Dean, who had done work for Yes, did this, and that guy we were talking about earlier, who was it again?
John.
What
was the gentleman's name? The A&R guy?
Oh, John Kalodner. Sorry, yeah.
He was not a fan of this. He's like, this. I don't want this. I don't want this. I don't want this guy doing this album cover.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me.
But he got overruled, and we get probably the
It's misleading, I think, a little. Well, not so much though, because there are a number of rock bands.
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, they got album covers. I mean, a serpent rising out of chasing the pearl of wisdom. It's like this is something that you would expect heavy leaning into prog, kind of thing. If you knew,
Yeah.
But and to get what you get, you get this sort of like real, just sort of more commercial, not commercial, but accessible
It seems like they
music
cut
on the
out.
record.
Yeah, it seems like
Yeah.
they just cut out all the musical stuff, like all the bloat or the perceived
Bloat.
bloat. Sorry, that you get in Prog. Because, like I said, some of that middle album feels like those songs could have been longer. Like it feels like some of those songs you could have inserted 2 or 3 separate areas to extend. Heat of the Moment, I don't think that's a pop song.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the
Only
Be My
Time Will
Baby beat.
Tell Only Time Will Tell is a pop song, but some of the other ones that you get towards the middle of the album definitely feel like they could have been expanded upon us again, especially with some of the lyrical content. I feel there's room there, but then there's some solidly pop style songs that benefit from that, short and sweet treatment, which made them. I mean, this, like I said, this album went to #1, so there was enough on here that either fooled people or because things would change radically after this. I mean, Thriller was on the horizon. There's a lot of stuff coming that was going to decidedly change, I think, Asia's fortunes. I think probably they hit at the right time. If you're going to swing for one home run, I think 82 might have been the right time for it.
Yeah, this was still, you're coming right off the 70s. We still had that decidedly more rock oriented music happening in the early 80s too. So yeah, it was. You're right. It's exactly the right time. And it's no fault of the bands. I mean, like I said before, it takes just as much talent to show restraint than it is to do all the noodling. And we know that they're capable of this stuff. But to decide not to do that, that's not a bad thing. And we've said this before, like dozens of times. I think we've made the case for Genesis and for and for even for Yes. A year later, 90125 would come out, decidedly more pop.
Yeah,
but an
their
amazing
only #1 hit, "Oh No, Lonely Heart."
Yeah.
So, Chris, what do you got?
I was gonna say, I mean, at some point too, like there's got to be a certain level of I've done this already. Like how many times are you gonna make Brain Salad Surgery or Tarkus or Close to the Edge, and or at some point you want to try something else. So I mean, if you could look at it that way, like chalking it up to an experiment or trying to do things that are more concise, because I mean, it's like what you just said. 90125 comes out a year later, and that's a fantastic record too, and it's definitely the same. It's almost like, to me, the way I thought about it, and again, this just might be because I'm a big Yes fan, is like, if you really think about it, Drama, again, for those of you who haven't heard Drama, you really should go listen, and you're into Yes, you really should go listen to Drama. Drama has a lot of the elements that you would see come to fruition on things like Asia and 90125. It's like they took what was good about Drama and dropped some of those elements, like Steve Howe's guitar tone and the keyboard sounds. Even Tony Kaye, I think, keyboard wise, sounds similar to what Jeff Downes was doing on Drama. And then they took, and Drama also was concise in some respects. I mean, yes, there's some songs that are like 10 minutes long, but that's still not as long as some of the other tunes that they've done. And I feel like they took what was concise on Drama and even made it even more concise on Asia and 90125.
Yeah, I mean, think of this. You've got this album by Asia that comes out. You have Yes, 90125 that comes out. And then you have also in 83, you have Genesis' self-titled album, which was kind of I would make the case that it was probably their last really proggy album. Invisible Touch
for sure.
Yeah. I mean, Invisible Touch had a little bit. They always tried to have a nod, but I always felt that the Genesis self-titled album was kind of a dark feeling album. It just had even though some of the songs were poppy and light, it had that undertone in it. So there was this little mini renaissance in the 80s, but then there was all these failures of like GTR and like they kept
the first GTR record do good though. I thought that first GTR record sold.
It became
I think it was the the whole supergroup thing. It was it was Hackett and Howe, and that's what sold.
Yeah,
but ultimately, I don't think the music just didn't back up the. And then you get you get all these people like we've never even heard of. Max Bacon as like
my next question.
Yeah, he was like the lead singer. Like, who's Max Bacon? Like, but these guys
had joining the firm. Max
But
Baker, right?
but that's the thing. It's like, but you realize that they, through all this, you really had some talented people come out in later iterations of Yes.
Yeah, but you just start throwing shit against the wall. That's what you're going to get.
That's right. And it was too much of it.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, ELP got back. Emerson, Lake and Powell.
Yeah.
Yep. Carl. Yeah. It's like,
right. And then Carl Palmer came back, but they got it wasn't Greg Lake. It was Keith Emerson and some other singer.
Did they?
And the name of the band was Three.
Yep, I remember. It was just
called Three to the Power of Three. That was the name of the record. Yeah.
So here's my question, and Chris and both the guys take a crack at it. But what is it with prog groups and constant lineup changes? The only prog group I can almost think of that never changed was Rush. Everybody else, like the guys are leaving, they're coming, and ELP, because at the time everybody's name was in the band, so you kind of had to stay until they did that nonsense with Cozy Powell. But right, King Crimson is 15 different members, yes, coming and going. Genesis was somewhat stable, but they kept losing members. It's not like they had people coming in, but they kept on losing.
Right.
What is it with prog bands and these constant revolving door?
Well, King Crimson was an ongoing experiment. That's the great thing about Crimson, was every iteration was different. Everything. I mean, that was Robert Fripp. He did not want to do the same thing again and again and again and again.
So the frustration of his band members.
Right. Exactly. He was a perfectionist, but a perfectionist to the extreme. I mean, even he would doubt even himself, and it would just be. I mean, there's an amazing documentary. Finally, I got to see it on Prime. I think
so
it's on
good.
Prime. Yeah,
phenomenal.
But my favorite lineup, believe it or not, is the 80s lineup with Ballou and Tony Levin.
Those 3 records are fantastic.
Yeah, and they did it right. I mean, that was like new wavy and prog at the same time. You had the old veterans there with Bruford and Fripp, but the new guys, they sounded, like Ballou sounds a lot like, to me, like David Byrne, like his voice is similar, and they did a lot of weird shit though, man. Yeah, it was just so good though. I mean, improv and quirky. And that was the key too, was the quirkiness of a good pop band, incorporating that into an otherwise pompous sound, right? I mean, something, decidedly more like classical, or that type of thing, when you had like these players that would come in and shake it up with like that were influenced by jazz, like Bruford and Phil
But it seems
Collins,
like there was always all these round, like it seems like this revolving door of people, like they're in this band, then they're in Yes, then they're helping out here.
It depended on I think it just depended on what the band represented, I guess. I mean, for me, Yes, I didn't ever understood why Yes, they had it. They had the classic lineup. You couldn't get any better.
And then after that, you just had people coming in and out. And then Asia would suffer the same fate, right? John Wetton would leave. Greg Lake would come in. Wetton would come back, or someone else. And then Steve Howe would leave. And then he'd go join another band. He'd start all over with another poppy, proggy project, right? It seems like these guys just, Chris, like they went from like one thing to like no one could ever like stay.
Well, I mean, I think with ELP, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, I think there was a certain level of arrogance to those 3 guys. Yeah. And I think the idea that they needed each other to get that sound. I don't think they were the greatest of friends. And I think they all thought that they were the bee's knees and like they were kind of like the central element. And I think that there was some element of that with Yes. I think what it is that I think elements of it was like you had Bill Bruford, who was kind of the guy who was like, okay, I did this thing with ELP, but now I'm going to go try my stripes with something else, and I want to try something else. Mm-hmm. I think Rick Wakeman left.
And he also worked with Genesis too, though. Bill Bruford.
He did.
Yes, he did. He was actually very critical of touring with Genesis. He was, if you read his biography.
These guys are just making the rounds, though, right?
And then you got Rick Wakeman. I think left. Yes, put out this record in the mid '70s called "Tales from Topographic Oceans," which. It's not, if you're getting into prog, it's not the record I would suggest you start with, because it's 2 records and it's 4 songs long. And he felt that it was super bloated. Uh-huh. So he left after that tour. But then when they started to get more concise and a little bit more back to where they started on the record, Going for the One, he came back for 3 records, but then split when he thought it was. So I think it's With Yes, I think it's more of the idea of this isn't my thing right now, so I'm going to go do something else. Whereas with ELP, I think it's the idea of, again, I think it was the egos. And I think with King Crimson, it's just Robert Fripp is going to follow his muse. And if his muse involves certain musicians at this time, great. And if it doesn't involve these guys, so
Then
be it. And I'm going to have to find other people. And as far as lineups with King Crimson, what I would say is I would agree with Eric. And I think those 3 records at the dawn of the 80s are fantastic. And that's an amazing lineup. But second to that lineup, right before Crimson called it a day right before, I think COVID is what finally took them off the road. I think he called it like a double trio or something. And it was the only time, and I think he had like somewhere like between like 6 and 8 musicians. I forget the exact number.
Yeah.
But he took them out on the road, and it's the only time he ever did an entire career spanning tour. And he did everything from the first record all the way up to what they were doing, the last record they recorded.
Yeah.
And they did it really well, and all the musicians were happy to be there. And there's this one live record, and I can't think of the exact name of it, but they played in Mexico in 2017. It is one of the best things I've ever heard King Crimson do, because the band is so tight and it covers everything that you like about King Crimson.
And as it should be. But unlike Yes, when they did that horrible Union thing.
Yeah, that was a bad record.
They took both iterations out on the road, the Rabin lineup, and then the classic Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, and how all of them playing together. I can't even imagine how that sounded.
They put out a live record. It wasn't bad. It wasn't a bad live record that came out from that tour.
Yeah, I don't know. It just, yeah.
And then we get Asia. I mean, and that's kind of what spawned all this. And maybe maybe one of the things is the ease with which these members move from group to group makes it easy to kind of go to this project and be like, yeah, okay, we'll do this. Let's make a record. And let's give this a try, and open to being partnered with people as opposed to something happening organically, right? Like we said in the Wilburys example, where this was more of a construct. But maybe since these guys are so used to moving in and out of groups that it's like, yeah, okay, you have a project for me. Oh, I'm going to be working with so-and-so, or okay, it's maybe a more pragmatic and business-like approach to it. But nevertheless, it worked. I mean, I think this album was the lightning in the bottle for them, like we said, at the right time and the right sound that was accessible enough to hit the charts without kind of going out on, like Eric said, you said it really well, the restraint that they needed to, because they come from this pedigree of just kind of, okay, it's my turn. I got the next 10 minutes.
Well, I'm a witness to this, because like I said, I was just getting into prog, and some of this stuff is, it's challenging to listen to when you're really a novice and you don't really know. It's hard to kind of, dig into this stuff, and you might scare some people away. Is
this a good album? So then would this be a good album for someone who?
I think it's a good starting point.
I talk to some people and they're like, well, what is prog? What is progressive music? And I try and explain it. Would this be a good beginner, like first grade? I don't want to demean the music by saying first grade or kindergarten, but I think you know what I mean in the progression. Yeah. Meaning something to start out with. Is this a good starting off point for someone to kind of get a feel for, okay, because I think all the elements are there in most of the songs. What you're going to get if you go further is just long. I'm going to break it down easier, but longer versions of the same thing.
You could start with this record, and then perhaps maybe the next step would probably be, okay, listen to 90125, because there, in that. They're doing a little bit more on that record. There's a little bit more flourishing happening. There's some fancy production work happening where they're adding a lot of stuff in the mix and, sounds and quirk, and then you go back and okay, now check out Drama.
Yeah.
And check, just keep going, you know what I mean? Or check out the Crimson era.
Yeah, I was just going to say the beautiful thing is you can go to ELP, right, Chris? I mean, you can kind of.
I mean, for me, it was the first Yes album I really knew really well was probably the Yes album, the one right before the first record Steve Howe played on. And to me, that's, I think, as accessible as Asia with better songwriting. I mean, the songs are better, the production is better, but I mean, I think Asia is also a good jumping off point, and I think there's something to be said where you can work your way back. Well, if I go here, then I could go back to Drama and the '80s Crimson, and then I could go back to Going for the One. Going for the One's also a good entry point too, because
That's a good
it's
album.
not as bloated as some of the other ones. But
let me put it this way, because Chris, you said a lot of the prog people really just dragged this album.
Yeah,
it spent 9 weeks at number one, so it didn't just hit number one. And we'll see.
I mean, there had to be a built-in audience. Like, I wonder how many people bought this just out of curiosity of like, well, I dig ELP and I dig Crimson and I dig.
I'm sure that
it was also the best-selling album of 1982 in the United States. It was the best-selling album of '82. So these guys kind of came on seemingly out of nowhere, a group with a curious name, and then kind of these songs didn't dominate the charts. Heat of the Moment hit number 4. Everything else after that tumbled down, and decidedly some of the album is an acquired taste. But it was the best-selling album of '82.
Pure diehard. I hate to generalize. I don't like to generalize, but I don't think that diehard prog purists don't care about how many records it sold.
No, not at all.
But what I'm trying to say is, do you think it, like Chris was saying, do you think it was the prog people buying this, or do you think it was legit? Like people like, oh wow, this is really cool stuff.
And you also have to think how much prog was really coming out in 82, because like, I know for me, and again, I know this is going to sound really elitist, I kind of fall off of Genesis after Duke, right? So like, how many
How dare you, sir? How dare you?
How many prog fans really stuck with Genesis, after Abacab? And then how many, I mean, outside of King Crimson, I can't really think of any prog bands really doing anything. ELP broke up after that horrible record in 1979 called Love Beach. Like, is there really, and Yes broke up after Drama. So is there really anything left? And if you're a Yes fan, I would think you're going to try and fill the hole with, the fact that Jeff Downes and Steve Howe are still together, because at that point, Yes really was kind of in limbo. Like, Chris Squire and Alan White were working together, but they were working with Jimmy Page, and they were going to try another project, and John Anderson had nothing to do with it. So really, if I'm a prog fan in '82 is in America, is there really anything else other than this record? And I think that I'm not saying it's all because of the curiosity factor, but I definitely think part of their record sales had to have come from the curiosity factor.
That's
in '82, I mean, the closest, I'm not going to come close, but the closest will come. Avalon by Roxy Music.
That's true too. Yeah, I didn't think about that.
There's not a lot here. Security by Gabriel came out in '82.
Yep.
Signals by Rush came out in '82.
All right, maybe I'm wrong.
No, I'm not saying you're wrong. There's not. I'm not.
But Signals also that was the first real synth.
Yeah, I'm not making the case that you were wrong, that there was a lot out there. I'm just saying that there, Eye in the Sky by Alan Parsons Project came out also. But that is
a big record too, wasn't it?
That's much more accessible also.
Right.
So there was that, like Eric and I had said in the past, there was that turning towards, we've done it and we're not, and maybe it's just, it's not paying off, this prog thing. I don't know if that's a hot take. And a lot of these artists turn towards making it more accessible, and then they reap the rewards. I mean, we've seen it, right?
I've always tried to make the case, though. How many times, though? Like, what's your point of view of prog? Is it just the sort of the pompous dun 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 type stuff, or could it
over long solos?
Yeah, or could it be? Like I said, I always make the case that things like, Ghost in the Machine by The Police, I consider that prog.
Sure.
I consider that, there's things on that record that are just that strange, and so that, there, a lot of jazz fusion at this point was also considered. It's a fine line between prog music and jazz, so there's
there's a lot of metal too that. A lot of metal had prog in it too.
Yeah, there was a progressive metal subgenre. So
that, like, again, it's splintering off into, so if you're just looking at the, songs about fucking wizards and shit, and Rick Wakeman wearing a friggin' robe and just like, like the cone of light, and all this kind of stuff.
The 6 Wives of Henry VIII.
and 50
and
keyboards
Gabriel wearing friggin' bat wings on his head, and
that's prog.
But for some people that is prog. That is the definition, and they are devoted.
Oh my God, yeah.
Devoted to that stuff, and nothing else is,
Right.
there's a chance. I love both iterations of Genesis. I've been listening to them late, like, because we do this podcast. I've always loved Phil. I've always loved what he brings. Like you mentioned the self-titled album, Dean.
Mm-hmm.
I've been listening to the hell out of Home by the Sea, especially the second part.
Yep.
I fucking love it. I just, I'm thinking of the concert. I'm thinking of the, but again, it's lending itself to a different approach. And I think as long as you have that streak in you, Tony Banks will never give up the weird freaking patches on his keyboard.
Nope.
He's never going to do that. He said it himself. He's quoted as saying, he says, "I'm probably the reason why people hate Genesis." Because I'm always weird. I'm always, coming out with these weird things, the Brazilian and, all this kind of shit. Like, Marillion, again, that's another band we have.
Man,
they kind of popped up around this time as well.
Exactly.
84, you had Misplaced Childhood was their big record. I think
that's right. Then they did that second album with Kaylee, which was decidedly more of a pop.
That's on Misplaced Childhood.
Yeah, that's a Misplaced Childhood.
Okay.
Yep. Before we get into the Three Lies and a Truth, here's a retrospective review. Tom Demelon awarded Asia 4.5 stars out of 5, saying that there's no denying the epic grandeur of the music, which provided some much needed muscle to radio at the time and did so with style. So that's where we're also looking at this from a prog point of view and not what the music was representing at the time, and what was on the horizon, right? That we're kind of picking at it. We're kind of picking the scab from the progressive point of view, but from the pop point of view, they're like, well, from pop listeners, this is music that's got some meat behind it. It's got a little something there. It's not the break my stride pop, throwaway stuff, right? That it had a little, in that sea of pop music, this group comes through with something that's kind of a little heavy and a little challenging to the listener for someone that's not even a casual listener to progressive music. It kind of brought a little bit of that to the forefront.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think Wetton also took the approach too. Maybe he was trying to garner a new audience.
Yeah.
Some women, as they're trying to cultivate that type of, because women, I guess at that time, were not decidedly big prog fans.
Yeah.
In my house, they are now.
Yes, did it. Yeah.
In your
But now, I mean, you'd be surprised. You'd be surprised that there are people out there who are just as devoted and just as, I've been listening to them since day one, and I'm like, wow, that's surprising. You would never,
and it's pretty neat. And I think maybe that's what the thing was, is to take a style of music that isn't known for being overly accessible, right? And that could be an elitist statement, I guess, and bring it to the masses, to then maybe, like you said, Eric, then to take the trip backwards.
Yeah. And
start to maybe see, okay, this is kind of cool. And then you get challenged a little more, as opposed to just getting pushed in the deep end, right?
Hey, listen, we're always going to have those staples, okay? We're always going to have Dark Side of the Moon. We're always going to have In the Court of the Crimson King, Brain Salad Surgery. Those are the great records of the prog, and the albums in between. Yeah, we could go back and forth. Which one is better? That one's underrated. This one, but we're always going to have those big statements. And that's really what it's about. I mean, it's just they make that big moment. It's much like the Beatles with Sgt. Pepper. Are they consistently trying to make the next great thing? And I guess that maybe perhaps that lends itself to why there's so many, band changes. We need new blood. We need something different. We need a new sound. we want to try this.
Yeah, and had the opportunity to do it. They
Right.
wouldn't be pigeonholed.
I mean, not,
Yeah.
and even if like, to your point, like not even to think about like, I'm not comparing Asia to the Beatles or the Rolling Stones by any stretch of the imagination. But if you think about what the Beatles followed up Sgt. Pepper with, they followed it up with the White Album, all right, which is a little bit more of a straight ahead rock and roll record. So even they said, how much further can we go with Sgt. Pepper and I Am the Walrus?
And what's on the other side of that?
Right. And then even like the Stones, they did their Satanic Majesty's Request, which was really, I think, gets slammed a little bit harder than it should. But then the next record that comes out after Satanic Majesties is Beggar's Banquet. So like even they realize, okay, we've gone as far as we can go in this direction. Now we need to get back to and maybe try to simplify things. So on some level, you got to wonder, like I said, I keep saying that, I've probably said this 100 times tonight, but like at some point, how many more times can you do, like even like Emerson, Lake and Palmer, The Works, how bloated was that record? The Works was like them like doing these long drawn out solos. And so at some point you got to go in the other direction. To move forward, you got to go back in some respects.
Right. And a solo without context. I mean, what's great about a lot of this long stuff is the changes. You actually, in effect, you have maybe 5 or 6 different songs within one complete thought. It's more or less a suite of music. But if you don't have those changes, if you don't have that, and all you have is just noodling and this and that, and it's long-winded, and that can get just. I mean, your eyes.
You're going to lose the listener.
Forget about it.
It's going to start to glaze over, and I guess that's the magic of Asia, is kind of giving you a glimpse into that genre. Without a lot of the mistakes or a lot of the stuff that would be snooze-worthy, right? But they give you, like I said, in the middle, they give you just enough. Let's take this opportunity, since everyone's all progged up, you guys are all worked up and getting all passionate about it.
Hey, don't forget ELO is also a prog band.
I make that argument too.
There you go. Symphonic, they
did start out. So did a lot of bands. Styx had the prog,
Queen,
and they really were,
right. That symphonic rock, they all,
absolutely.
So,
let's do 3 Lies and a Truth at home. If this is your first time listening to us, I'm going to read 4 statements. 3 of them are just out and out lies, not true. One statement is true. These gentlemen are going to need to suss out the truth from the lie. Now, I'm not sure who's going to go first this time. Usually I have one expert that I leave because I don't want them to mess it up. But what are you saying?
No, Chris will go first.
Chris will go first.
Yeah.
All right. Yep. Chris is the first catch of the day. So we're going to read 4 statements. 3 are lies. Only 1 is true. Let's see what you can come up with, Chris. Don't say anything until we read them, and then I'll read them again if you want. You'll hear them multiple times. You at home also, you'll hear it multiple times, so don't worry. So here we go. First statement. The group came up with the name Asia by throwing a dart at a map. Second statement. In addition to Trevor Rabin, ELO founder Roy Wood also auditioned for Asia. Number 3. Album cover artist Roger Dean took inspiration from a line in Heat of the Moment for the album Catch a Pearl. From Heat of the Moment. Last statement. Carl Palmer and Jeff Downes are the only original members of Asia to appear on every album. Okay, so I'll run through those again. First one, the group came up with the name Asia by throwing a dart at a map. Number 2, in addition to Trevor Rabin, ELO founder Roy Wood also auditioned for Asia. Number 3, album cover artist Roger Dean took inspiration from a line in Heat of the Moment to make the cover art of a dragon reaching out for a pearl. The lyric in Heat of the Moment is you catch a pearl and ride the dragon's wings. Then the final statement, Carl Palmer and Jeff Downes are the only original members of Asia to appear on every album. Chris?
I feel like I heard the Roy Wood one, so that's going to be what I think is the truth.
You think that in addition to Trevor Rabin, ELO founder Roy Wood was asked and auditioned for Asia?
Yeah, I feel like I read that, yes.
That's you read that. All righty. Eric, do you want me to read them again, or you got you're locked in?
I'm going to go with number 3, actually.
Album cover artist Roger Dean took inspiration from a line in Heat of the Moment to catch a pearl and ride the dragon's wings.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. At home, let us know what your answer was. If you got it right or wrong, hit us up on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube. Let's see. Let's start to slice away the lies. The first lie. The group came up with the name by throwing a dart at a map. That's not true. I heard two different stories. The first story I remember hearing when the album first came out, I saw an interview or heard that the reason why they came up with the name Asia is because it would be in alphabetical order. If you're going through records, like in the record store, you would come upon an Asia album first. It would be like, you kind of come up to them, or in alphabetical listings of artists, Asia would be at the top. Another thing I read recently is that the guy, John, whatever his name is, I keep forgetting.
Kolodner.
He said that, you know what? If the shorter the name, the bigger we can have it on the marquee. So having a name Asia with only 4 letters, it can be big on the marquee as opposed to an E. Emerson, Lake and Palmer or some type of thing like that. Mm-hmm. But you certainly didn't beat Yes with 3 letters.
Nope.
Well, Saga. Don't forget about Saga.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Letters.
Yeah.
Sticks. Another lie. Carl Palmer and Jeff Downes are the only original members of Asia to appear on every album. Actually, it's only Jeff Downes. He has stayed the course. He is the one carrying the torch of Asia through. They're on tour now. He's got a reinvigorated lineup, and he's the only original member. I don't know how I feel about. I mean, obviously John Wetton passed away. We lost him, so you kind of lost the voice of Asia. So you need to replace that. But Carl Palmer, there's no other Carl Palmer. There's only one Steve Howe.
He's got Virgil Donati playing drums right now, from what I was looking at. Virgil Donati.
Who is he? He used to work at the shop roll? I don't know.
He's like a Prog. I feel like he's tied to a couple of metal bands too. He's like he's a pretty good drummer. So.
Okay. I feel
he's not Carl Palmer, but he's definitely an excellent drummer.
I feel that this band was very unique in its makeup, that it's hard to just slot people in and out because you created this as a supergroup, and then you're just kind of deconstructing the supergroup and making it just a group. It's not like Foreigner or Boston or something. I'm not slighting those bands or those members, but it's easier to, if the bass player leaves, you get another bass player.
Right.
These guys were put together as this super group, and then you're losing members and you're replacing them with Joe Schmo for all intents and purposes.
It's true.
The concert going public. That leaves us with two statements. In addition to Trevor Rabin, ELO founder Roy Wood also auditioned for the group. And album cover artist Roger Dean took inspiration from a line in Heat of the Moment to make the album cover. What do you guys want, the lie or the truth? Want me to tell you I love you? Lie to you and tell you I love you?
The lie. I guess
the lie.
Bad news first,
Eric. Give me the bad news first. Break my heart. The bad news. The third lie is album cover artist Roger Dean took inspiration from a line in Heat of the Moment. It's actually the opposite way. The album cover was done. Heat of the Moment was the very last song they recorded, and John Wetton got the line from, he saw the dragon reaching for the pearl, and he wrote the line in reverse.
That makes sense.
Kind of a neat inspiration. Yeah, that the album cover was done, and they're like, we need one more song. We've heard that story before, Eric, you and I, where there's like one, like you have 9, we need 10, and then the last one's the hit that they come up with.
Yep.
It's like so much. So that's false. The truth of the matter is, in addition to Trevor Rabin, my man, ELO founder Roy Wood auditioned for Asia. I cannot think of what that would be like. It would not be anything that we know this album to be.
I had heard that he had been considered. I didn't know that he auditioned. That they actually went through with, So that's why I didn't pick it. I knew I had heard that, but I heard that they were just considering him, not that he actually auditioned.
Yeah, so Trevor Rabin walked away from it saying there's no vibe here, or like I'm not comfortable. I don't really like what's going on. Roy Wood, he's not the right choice.
No,
I love Roy Wood. Like I said, this would have been something totally. It might have been something brilliant. It would not have been a number 1 album. I could tell you that much. It would not have done what this album did. And that's not a slight.
It's just he's not a guy he's not writing AOR.
He can. No. He does. I just don't think he would. I just don't think with the pedigree of everybody else, he's not really a he could be. He's eclectic. He's not progressive rock. He's like eclectic. He does so many different. He does country. He does jazz. He does so many different genres.
Right.
That I don't know if they'd be able to contain him. Where like Eric said, that you need. John Wetton had the discipline to write these songs and to keep them tight and concise and kind of in the progressive pop format. Right. He kind of knew. I think he understood the mission. Yeah, I think we got to give him a lot of credit because his name is on every single writing credit. So I think we need to kind of acknowledge that John Wetton really was the secret sauce, because otherwise you might have seen Roy Wood's name on every other thing, or he might have let whoever write stuff, Steve Howe, and who knows how that would have come out. So having the fact that John Wetton co-wrote everything kind of makes the case that this would not have been what it was without him.
And what's interesting too is, to your point about AOR, one of the things I was reading that I was surprised about is, I don't know if either of you know who Robert Fleischman is, but Robert Fleischman was actually given the nod to join Journey right before Steve Perry did, to give them that that standout singer. And then he ended up not fitting the bill with Journey. He was actually in the running to sing this record. And he was the one that stood up and said, really, I'm not the guy that should be singing these songs. It's John Wetton. And it's kind of been like the story of his career. Like I think the only record I know he ever sang on was Vinnie Vincent from Kiss. His first solo record is the only record I've ever.
Vinnie Vincent Invasion?
Yeah. So,
wow.
But yeah, he was almost going to be the singer he was in consideration to be the singer for Asia.
Yeah. I think Fleischman, if it's the same story I'm remembering, he was working with Journey and starting to tour with them. But then the manager heard Steve Perry and is like, this guy's the right guy. So then what the manager did is he brought Steve Perry on tour, but said he was a roadie. And they would send Fleischman, like, go get lunch or go get dinner. And then they would bring out Steve Perry to do sound checks with the band to try him out.
Yep.
If it's the same guy I'm thinking of.
Yeah, he has writing credits on.
And then they just cut him loose. And they said, your services are no longer needed. I think
but he has
what we need.
He has 3 or 4 writing credits on Infinity, though. So I would imagine if you have writing credits on Infinity, you don't have to worry about your finances too much.
God, that's such a dick move, though. Wow.
Yeah, they were filling out Steve Perry while they had this guy there, and then just kind of go, all right, sound check's over, go back to the hotel room.
There's actually video of him on YouTube singing with the band.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yep. Yeah, so it's very strange.
That's amazing. Wow.
Yeah. Final thoughts. If we're talking favorite tracks, I'm going to go with the first 3, and then the last one. I think again that hits me in my pop. It's the first 3 really kind of set the album up. You really start out, like I said, it kind of weans you into the middle part of the album. If you're new to that or not ready for that kind of material, the first 3 songs progressively get you there, I think. Chris, what do you got?
Soul Survivor for me stands out. And what I thought was interesting too is if you're a King Crimson fan, there are elements on that song that sound like they could have been on In the Court of the Crimson King, like some of the synthy sounds. And then I liked Time Again, Without You, and Cutting It Fine were the ones that stood out to me after that one. Kind of that, which I guess kind of speaks to middle of the pack, where you, like as you said, is where it's getting a little more proggy.
Yep. Eric?
Time Again. My favorite track.
Really?
But I think Only Time Will Tell is a gem.
It's probably my favorite.
That's a great keyboard.
Heat of the Moment. I think Heat of the Moment's a little played.
Yeah, I love that down sound, the keyboard sound of that, and that's reminiscent of Drama right there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And even the Buggles.
Yeah.
You hit that very distinctive. It's synth, I guess. I don't know what exactly he was using there, but man, he had just a very distinct sound like that. I love that. So yeah.
I think that's going to do it for this episode. Asia is a very interesting album. It's interesting in the lineup of stuff we're doing, but we do dip our toes into the prog, and we have. And I just thought when I read that it was the number 1 album for the whole year of '82, I'm like, wow, we've been sleeping on this. I think we need to talk about it. I think people should check it out. It may not be for everybody, but it's definitely an interesting listen because the musicians are so great. They're on point. Like there's nothing messy about this album. There's nothing out of place about this album. It's just in a particular style But it's still very accessible. Like I said, they kind of cut the fat away for what you think progressive rock is, and they just give you the rock, which again was probably why it was the number one album and 4 million out the door. That wasn't disgruntled prog people, you know. I don't think there was 4 million. I'm sure word spread if it was a dog, you know, in the progressive circle. So it was certified radio hits. Plus MTV was in full swing in '82. So they were providing, videos for them as well. Mm-hmm. So you had that double edged sort of radio airplay, and then people getting to see them on MTV. And Carl Palmer's a good looking guy. So he is. When he got killed at the end of the "Don't Cry" video, he got pushed into the golden.
Well, they all were. John Wetton was pretty handsome as well. I mean,
he was like not so much.
He was the Indiana Jones character in the "Don't Cry" video, John Wetton.
And that Asia thing, I believe that you mentioned MTV. That was the very first.
That was the first
simulcast. It was.
Broadcast.
It's actually it's an excellent performance, and it speaks to what a player Greg Lake is to be that good on that short a notice.
Yeah, he just stepped in.
And it's on Spotify. So if anybody wants to go a step further and check out that live performance, it's worth a listen. I will say that.
If they want to get one step closer to Asia, was that?
There you go. And they were in Asia, right? They played in Japan. So
that ties everything up in a neat bow. Christopher Clark, thank you so much for joining us
on another fun one. Thank you.
Musical excursion. You guys hopefully got to exercise your prog rock muscles a little bit and kind of get release the dam a little bit that's been building up that we haven't done something in a while.
I got to go listen to some Yes and ELP now.
Chris, it'll be a while. It'll be a while.
I know.
The next prog album.
Selling England by the pound. That's what I'm putting if we're going to do another prog record, Selling England by the pound.
What? We'll see. How about Tormato?
No, that album's not.
No.
When I saw them, they did play a track off of that. Don't Kill the Well. It's pretty good live.
Yeah. Well, see, I could chat it up a little bit, but that's going to do it until the next episode. New episodes come out every Thursday. You could set your watch to it. I guarantee you, we will have a new episode hot and ready for you each and every Thursday. If you want to reach out to us, you can. If you're listening on your favorite audio podcast provider, you can actually text us right from the app. Let us know what you thought about Asia. If you've got any questions, we can pass them along and get them answered. But we love to interact with you, so go ahead. Don't be shy. Go ahead or just type hello and let us know you're out there, that you're checking us out. So Eric will be on his comfy couch waiting until we record our next episode. I will be on the very tough and hard green plastic IKEA chair waiting for you until we have our next episode. So for Mr. Christopher Clark, for Eric Cooper, this has been Mr. Dean Legiro. We will catch you on the flip side.
You've been listening to the 3324 podcast with Dean Legiro and Eric Cooper. You can find us on your favorite podcast provider, so please like, subscribe, and rate to become a part of the 3324 family. Your feedback is important, so make sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at 3324 podcast and on Twitter at 3324p to join the conversation.